Hello everyone. Since this is either a highlight, a standalone book, or the first episode in a series, I'm jumping in to remind you what the rules are for this podcast. First rule is, no real people stories. That means that any details from our own lives are merely anecdotal, we do not read books about real people, and we are not reading historical fiction. The second rule is that we are basing our analyses off of how the author treats characters and what they put them through. We are not judging the accuracy of the trauma, the accuracy of any actual conditions that may be portrayed, nor the authenticity of a character's reaction to that trauma or that particular condition. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The hosts are not trained professionals, and their opinions come solely from personal experience. In this episode, we discuss fictional depictions of trauma and violence that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please take care of yourselves. Specific content warnings for each episode can be found in the show notes. Events in the media are discussed in approximate order of escalation. This episode contains spoilers.
This week on Books That Burn, we are discussing All the Birds in the Sky, a book about two childhood friends grown to discover that they have grown apart. Hi, I'm Nicole.
And I'm Robin. And today on Books That Burn, we are discussing All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. Let's get into our factions. We have Patricia, Laurence, Roberta, Theodulfus, Serafina, Patricia's parents, Laurence's parents, the birds, and Change Me, or Peregrine.
So,
for Serafina and emotional connection.
So
Serafina is
this book has
Laurence's
some interesting
girlfriend.
Commentary.
Yes. And we'll talk about this probably a bit more with Laurence. I get the feeling that for, a lot of the book, it would be difficult to agree often with both Patricia and Laurence, and usually when there's a conflict, I feel like we're usually supposed to agree with Patricia. That might just be my own biases, but leans a little bit that way. Serafina is Laurence's girlfriend, and I am glad that she is just one of many female characters in this book because there's a lot going on here. And if she were the female representation, that would kind of stink. That's not what this book is doing at all. It's just that there's a lot of ways in which her presence in the book exists to help Laurence grow. But part of how she does that is by saying, look, buddy, I as a person do not exist just to help you grow. I am getting out. So, by leaving and by hypothetically having some life beyond the events in this book where she is just a minor character, kind of getting just neglected, by leaving the book, she takes her own agency. But also she's only in it in order to make Laurence to grow. It's kind of
it's kind of a weird, we're going to do the trope, but we're inverting it. But we're really not, because we're actually doing the trope, but it's going to serve the purpose as if we didn't do the trope, but we're going to do it anyway. It's like this, it almost feels like the author just wanted it to be this way and then was like, oh, how do I make this not terrible? Or the other way around, went, I really want to send this message that this character does not only exist for him, but I don't want her to do anything other than send that message. And so it's almost from a reader perspective, it's kind of a warped, okay, well, what do I do with this? Feeling, at least when I read it.
When I read it, it didn't bother me at all. I really liked it. And part of what helped me understand what her role was in here is that one of the things is that she works on, her job is to help robots be more emotionally expressive. And then towards the end of the book, she kind of figures out that her job isn't really to help robots be emotionally expressive. Her job is to help humans feel better about robots. And I think that kind of a commentary, to me, that, like, in a way, it makes it clear that all the stuff going on with her character probably is on purpose. And on purpose is in, like, trying to be, because obviously, like, the author, chose all the things to be in it, but that it's supposed to be this commentary. And I actually think it works really well. And there's this bit where she says that the uncanny exists so that humans can feel okay about killing each other. Part of her, like, conclusion from working with all these robots is that kind of like, the uncanny, when you say, like, the uncanny, that'd be things like the uncanny valley, like all this stuff where, like, something doesn't quite look human or recognizable or like we should empathize with it. And the thought that she's kind of expressing there is that we need something that feels not like us so that we can feel okay about killing it. And sometimes that it is other people.
I mean, that's not going to go into, like, a bunch of science, especially because I'm not the scientist. I just really like this concept.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's not unique to this book, but
No, it's definitely not unique to this book, but that's like a real theory that I've seen in basically in multiple parts. And my personal, I feel like this is podcast and trauma relevant, not necessarily, well, this book talks about robots, but, like, I've seen people kind of positing that, like, our fear of zombies is because they are us, but they can catch us, but they're almost not us because they're not human anymore. And it's not the uncanny valley, but it's related. And I've seen people, I've read a lot of stuff and seen a lot of things published about how, like, the uncanny valley was really just human and Neanderthal distinguishing from each other. And so quite literally, yes, the uncanny valley existed so that we could look at other primates that were so close to us, but they were not us, and say, you know what? That doesn't count. Death. So, like, this book is definitely not unique in trying to throw that concept out there. I mean, even in fiction, but, like, even in nonfiction, like, this is not, like, a wild idea. But the way the character is presented from a traumatic standpoint, like, I know, Robin, like, it's like you got what the character was supposed to be. I got what the character was supposed to be, but only after I kind of got done going, oh, why is it this again? Why is it about him again? And then I kind of went through and went, okay, all right, fine, sure. Her narrative arc is that's not the point, but you can't just do that with a character. You can't just have a character exist to say that they're not there for that. Like, because if you don't give them anything else, well, then they kind of are. And it doesn't matter that you yell really loudly that they're not doing this thing if that's the only thing. Like, if your only interaction with a human being in your entire life, the only time you intersect with another particular person is when they walk into the room yelling about how they're not a thief, and that's the only time you ever see them, it's like, okay, but forever in my mind, you are now branded as the guy who's really obsessed with not being seen as a thief. Now you're connected to thievery, and it doesn't matter that I've never seen you steal anything. Like, this is the only interaction that I have. It's the only connection that I have to you, is you just yelling really loud about how you didn't do it. Like, okay, well, I mean, that's great, buddy. It feels like that. And I wanted to put a non-violent example in there. I didn't want to be like someone yelling, I didn't want to give a more violent example, but, like, that's what it feels like reading that, or that's what it felt like reading this to me, is I was kind of like, okay, that's cool, but can she have anything else? Can she do something else? Can she have something she cares about outside of being obsessed with other people's validation? Like,
so here
as a
to
concept?
me, so to me it feels like, your character's in another story kind of a thing. Like, we watch her, like, she leaves him. Like,
I know she does, but then we don't see her
Because she
go
left.
live. Yeah. Like she left, so she's gone.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. So then looking at so the topic we had for this is emotional connection. And
yeah.
I think we've kind of talked around the idea of how we emotionally connected with her as a character, or how we were able to or not, because of the way she's in this book, literally to help Laurence learn more about emotions.
I mean, pretty much. That's the problem that I have with, I guess, with her is she's quite literally the emotion connection character. Mm-hmm. That's her trope, that's her job, that's her description.
It's literally her job.
It's literally her job. And she's the least relatable as a character to me. Mm-hmm. Because she doesn't exist outside of that. And we
had kind of a gap between when we made our notes and when we're sitting down to record this, and Nicole was like, who is Serafina and why is
I was
she
like, I don't remember
one?
this name. Who's this person? Mm-hmm. And Robin goes, oh, it's Laurence's girlfriend. And I was like, all right. Whatever. That's why. I remember her. I remember how much I dislike her. I don't hate her as if I met her as a person, she's cool. But as a character, I did not appreciate. I didn't appreciate her story arc. I want her to exist outside of loudly yelling that she's not responsible for other people.
Yeah, it does feel like she didn't get much of an arc, and
yeah, she had nothing.
Yeah, and as for the bit of Laurence's arc that relates to her, he keeps saying stuff that makes her uncertain about the relationship because he doesn't know how to read her. And then she feels like he isn't invested because he says stuff like feeling like he's on probation. And I don't know, it probably doesn't help that he's using a word that's associated with incarceration. For talking about for talking about a relationship, I don't know, just to me, all of the words related to marriage and relationships that are all about how you hate it and you're stuck, but you have to do it anyway. I'm just me in real life. I'm just I understand.
Then go.
I understand social pressures and widespread how there's all this stuff, but on an individual level, please don't spend your life with someone you hate. Please don't spend your life with someone who hates you. But anyway.
Just leave. Just go. It doesn't mean you have to never see that person again.
Yeah. But then here...
Don't be in that with them.
I'm really proud of one thing that Serafina does as a character. She's you're not making me feel safe and cared for, and I don't need you to take care of me, but you're making me feel like you don't trust me. And until you said that, I thought I could trust you, but now I don't know. And I'm gonna go. And also, Laurence is the kind of person who tries to solve uncertainty by, committing super hard. So he's our relationship is on the rocks. I better propose. Don't do that. It's not good. So I'm glad that, the message of the book is, that doesn't work. Don't do that, please.
Yeah. No, that's a good message.
Yeah. But Serafina is very kind of used and discarded by the narrative and by the author in that narrative. And I'm perfectly happy reading it as a commentary, given all of the other stuff in the book. But as a character, poor Serafina. I hope she's living her best life in some story.
I hope she exists somewhere else and has her own things.
Because this was not a good place for her. Though, by the end, this book is not really a good place for anyone. But anyway, I'm ready to talk about Laurence. On to Laurence, parental abuse, specifically neglect. So Laurence's parents, it's they want him to do pretty much everything except for what he wants to do. They don't want him to be on computers or near computers, and that's the thing he's really, really good at. But they're making him do sports. Then they only let him hang out with Patricia because she was teaching him about the woods, which in their minds is making him be in nature And for Patricia and Laurence, it was whatever the two of them wanted to do. Probably not in the woods, because Laurence hates the woods. We pick neglect as the topic for this one. And I do think that is, like, the right term for what's going on here, because they're not active in his life. They just don't like the direction. They're not positively active. They don't like the direction that he's going and what he's trying to do. And so they're like, don't go over there. Don't do that. They, like, push him in some other direction. But if he just, like, pretends that he's doing the thing they wanted him to do, they just leave him alone and barely interact with him.
Well, it's more than that.
Oh yeah, it gets worse.
A lot. Like there's so much of just we refuse to meet your needs in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Just going on in his whole entire life. Like they have the neglect of just we refuse to let you do the thing that makes you happy. Like you are not allowed to. We want you, like, we're telling you that you have to go hang out with this one person. But before that, I think there was a thing about him not being allowed to have friends before Patricia was basically like, hi, like, I am the person that can get in good with your parents. Or like his parents would scare friends off or something when they met.
I don't think he got that far. I don't remember it being, they wanted him to be in like a scout troop or something.
But there was something with, like, his parents and just not... Or they didn't, like, let him go places before Patricia convinced them to let him go with her. There was something like that. And we've had a little bit of a gap between reading this and recording because of holiday shenanigans and other things. So I'm trying to remember now. But I remember it being in my head that there was something where it was, like, he was isolated pretty hard.
He was socially isolated in the way that kids who seem a little bit different get bullied and isolated by their peers. And then the parents didn't have any positive interventions, but it's not like they made no one like him or stopped him from hanging out with anyone. They were grateful when Patricia wanted to hang out with him.
No, I'm not saying they made no one like him.
Patricia wanted to be around him.
Oh, no, I remember what it was.
Okay,
They blamed him for not having friends and said it was, and implied that it was his fault.
Yeah,
they
didn't do anything to stop it, but yeah, they were very negative.
I was like, it was more than just not doing anything to stop it. There was an extra layer, and I couldn't remember what the layer was. And I'm pretty sure that was it, that they literally were like, well, it's your fault if you don't XYZ. And that was a major problem and a major part of this plot point.
Yep. And then it gets a lot worse because they're like, well, you don't have enough friends because we haven't taught you any social skill or given you any positive interventions. We've only, like, made you do stuff you hate. So they sent him to a military school where he was bullied. It is heavily implied that he was tortured. Like, he comes out of it clearly emotionally tortured, possibly physically tortured. Like, when Patricia helps to rescue him, he is naked in a closet where he was shut in by the other students. So there aren't, like, depictions of torture other than the closet scene, but that's kind of like the aftermath. I don't know. It's such a complicated way of trying to talk about that. This book does not contain active torture scenes, but it is heavily implied that this character is tortured, is what I'll just say there. Just, you know, for your content warnings if you're thinking about reading it. But we don't have to watch torture scenes. But he is hurt and changed by having gone there, and his parents sent him there so that someone else could do the job of fixing him, because abandoning him up until now hadn't worked at all. So clearly they had to try abandoning him slightly differently, and maybe that would work. One thing that I think is, in terms of, like, how the author, like, handled this and depicts this, I think it makes it pretty clear. Like, the most important bits of what happened to him. Like, it's pretty obvious as a reader what the general shape of what went on, and given what the book is, that's all we really needed here. And I like that, because what was going on is neglect, that Patricia comes to say, no, I actively care about you. I'm going to help get you out. And then classic Laurence.
Man.
Doesn't want her to physically help, but like, it still mattered that she came. And that's, that's got ongoing character arc things, is that he doesn't know how to accept help because he didn't have positive help early and didn't have modeled how to accept help. So, like, I don't know, all of that really fits in with the early neglect, where when Patricia tries to help, he's like, I don't know what to do with this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Not really.
I know I think I was the one who put in this
I think
topic.
You were the one that had the most thoughts on Laurence. I have a lot more to say on Patricia.
Okay. So some last things that I want to say with Laurence. I really like his arc, because like, as much as I don't like a lot of the decisions he made, like, especially now that, like, I say aloud, he didn't accept Patricia's help in this case when it would have been extremely reasonable to accept help.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wait, he literally doesn't know how to accept help. He literally doesn't know how to, because he doesn't have previous positive experiences of being helped in a way where the intervention, like, actually worked and actually fixed the problem. And so, as much as I don't like that that's the way he reacted as I'm, like, talking about it, it fits, it makes sense, it feels really consistent. It, like, I don't know if it would have been out of character if he would have expected help, but early on, like, that early in the story, narratively, it would have been weird. And just, as much as I think I like Patricia a lot better, like, I get Laurence, and he feels, because, like, no.
Oh, he's a super solid character. Just, I don't know.
Even when he's doing something
feel
you hate, like, you understand why he did it. And so it's like, God damn it, Laurence. It's not, why did you do that? It's, oh, great. That's what you did. Of course.
It's, oh, of course. Of course you did. Why wouldn't you? Like, well, I mean, when this is the only thing you know, then you don't really have other options. Yeah.
And, like, and a lot of the framing of our podcast is that the author puts characters in situations where the only reasonable action is something that otherwise we would never consider and might think is unreasonable. But even within that framing, this author built a character where I'm like, oh yeah, of course he would do that. Not, of course, the world would make him do this, because that's what we see a lot more often. But of course, this character, even if put in a less harsh version of the world, would still do this because he doesn't know how to not yet. So I like that it feels like it makes sense for the character to react this way, and not just the world has been warped around him to make the unreasonable reasonable.
Yeah.
On to Patricia, doing parental abuse, again, specifically control.
Yeah, so Patricia has some very not, she also has some very not okay parental figures. And we actually had quite a debate way back when we were making these notes, Robin and I, between how we were going to talk about these characters from two different angles, because both, and I just don't want to leave Laurence out of this, both Patricia and Laurence are incredibly neglected, and which we talk about we focus on Laurence for that, but Patricia also undergoes a little bit more of physical and I'm trying to think of physical abuse, food control, just straight up bullying in her home as a child. There's a lot, kind of an extra layer. And so I want to put that in there while we're talking about this topic, because I want people to, if you're listening to our podcast and then you pick up this book, I want you to be prepared for both characters to really undergo a lot of very similar trauma. Their circumstances are completely different and the things that happen to them are different, but there are a lot of similarities, and so I don't want that to kind of slide by.
So I think with Patricia, her parents did a lot more preemptive, putting up guardrails to stop her from ever actually doing the thing. With Laurence, they were more reactive of, oh, you're not doing what we want yet, consequence. You're not doing what we want yet.
Right. Well, and also there's the difference that I believe Laurence was an only child and Patricia has an older sibling who actively bullies her. Younger? Oh.
From what I
forgot
remember.
that detail.
I believe it's the younger sibling, yeah. I will double check, but because my mental map for keeping track of my mental map for keeping track of characters' ages in books.
Keeping map.
It's I am the main character, and then I tag mentally other characters as either Nicole or our other sibling, Heather. And my mental tag for Roberta was Heather, which I'm pretty sure, based on how my brain does things, should mean that Roberta is younger, but I will double check.
So with Patricia, there's a lot of food abuse and food access abuse. There's a lot of like locking her in her room and refusing to let her out for days or weeks. Like, I think they even talk about her having to go to the bathroom in like a pot. That was a thing. Like, she didn't have access to the bathroom, or she would have to beg to be let out. Her food, like, this is wild to me. Her food was shoved under the door at her, and they talk about, or she describes like the door taking, quote unquote, the first bite of the food because it like the door scrapes off the top layer. And, you know, when we were reading this and when we were initially like figuring out our notes for this, I didn't really give that much thought because there's plenty of movies where you see that. But now I'm like, how big was the gap under that door? Or was everything like wafer thin to begin with and like, because it's on a plate. She describes the food as being on a plate. And, like,
for me, a thing that did break immersion
like
in the book a little bit.
4 or 5 inch door gap, right? Like, she could shove her entire arm under that door.
Yeah, I also was like, what is this door gap? Like, that did pause. That did give me pause.
But as a trauma, a description of trauma, as you know, a description of abuse, it's a very visceral image of like her food being shoved at her and like her missing pieces of it because they don't even care. They don't even try and fit it under in a way so that she actually gets it. Like, she just gets like, here, shove. Like, that door probably has rotting food on it. It probably smells awful. It probably is the only thing her room smells like. You know, there's a whole layer to that very, very visceral image, and it's really, really good. It's a really good, very visceral description of a particular abuse that has so many layers and implications to it, and it really sets up like this dynamic between her and her family. And there's more, and you know, and then she, you know, she's also kind of neglected a lot of the way Laurence is. Like, she just runs off and does her own thing in the woods. And what I don't remember is, her parents don't know about the magic, right?
They
pretty sure that was like her secret. Yeah. So this is not you have a thing that we're trying to get out of you or something, or a shunning because of a magic.
Nope. They don't know
anything. Like, it's literally just them deciding to hurt their child for no reason. And they don't treat her other sibling this way. Like, this is not just their parenting style. This is targeted and deliberate at this one kid. And and part of the thing I think that makes her story feel different to me from Laurence's also is, like, Laurence, we kind of get a little bit of a background of like, okay, well, his parents had these particular goals for him, kind of like Robin said, like they had goals, he didn't meet their goals, they're really, really bad at being parents, and so they just decided to like, well, how can we force him to be the way we picture a child should be? We're not given an explanation for Patricia's parents. They're just terrible. They're just terrible, and they're terrible to her and not her sibling. Well, not in the same way to her sibling, at least. We don't actually know much about that.
Yeah, I can't find their relative ages. I think in my head I assumed Roberta must be younger because of the way she gets brought in as an accomplice.
I just assumed older because
she's kind of actively malicious in a...
She's actively malicious in a I control the house and I resent you kind of a way.
Mm-hmm.
Which feels more like a seniority abuse than it does anything else. Which doesn't necessarily have to be someone older, but longer in a position or feels threatened by you coming on their turf kind of a thing.
Right.
And like that's what, or at least that's how it read to me. But
yeah, I have
but yeah, like there's idea. Just no, there's no even.
I don't think it matters. It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. No, but her story almost feels to me like it's more like Lawrence's story feels bad, but really more just tragic.
Mm-hmm.
His parents are just bad parents. They might not even really be bad, deliberately bad people. They're just bad parents. They just don't know what to do. And so they lash out and they don't bother to think maybe they were wrong about their assumptions of what a child is. Like, I think there's even his parents, wasn't there like a thing where his parents were raising him the way they had wanted to be, or the way their parents they were as children, and they just kind of assumed like, oh, he's our kid, he'll be like us. And if he's not, well, that's all we know how to have him do, so we'll just force this on him. And it gives it more of like a tragedy element. But Patricia, it's just deliberately abusive and almost like not almost violent in a we're targeting you and we are coming after you and we will hurt you because we can kind of a way. And it's just a very different feel, if that makes sense. At least to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I am now like, oh my goodness, what are their relative ages? Because we both read this dynamic so differently.
Do you think it would be obtrusive if we tweeted the author and was like, hey, we read your book and we just want to we just have a question. This doesn't mean anything. We've already recorded our episode, but we're just really curious. How old are they? Like, I don't know.
I'm not going to do that.
That's fair.
If you listen to our episode, hi! Can you let us know if Roberta's older or younger? But we
really want to know. Because apparently we read this two different ways, which is funny.
Intrude like that. Yeah, like it kind of felt like, I don't know, because like all kinds of families can have like very different dynamics, and but the main thing is, for whatever age reasons, they have the parents when Roberta and Patricia were kids, they enlisted Roberta to help in their abuse of Patricia.
Yeah. They were like, hey, you're just going to do this for us.
Yeah, and then later in life, Roberta's kind of a screw up, and the parents are like, oh wait, Patricia, you kind of have steady work, or
you kind of have your life together. What?
Yeah.
We tried so hard to harm you. How did this happen? Okay.
Magic.
Maybe that shouldn't have been the response, parents, or the anything parents. Like, oh my gosh.
Nah. So you'd asked earlier, like, if the parents knew she had magic. I mean, in the sense that the parents knew she said she talked to the birds, I think, maybe.
Yeah, but let's be real.
No, that the parents did not actively understand that she really
most
had magic.
Kids I have ever babysat under the age of 5 will tell me how they're talking to the animals.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean her telling the parents, well, I heard the birds, like,
or the cat, yeah.
Or the cat, like, yeah. That's not a I babysit a 5-year-old, and that 5-year-old says, I'm talking to the birds, and then they start trying to imitate birds calls. Like, that doesn't mean they have magic. Like,
oh yeah.
Even in universe of the book, like, that doesn't mean that they would know or take it seriously. I will say this before we go to our wrap up, we're still on the topic of Patricia. I was reading this, I legitimately thought that the story of this, for some reason, and I have no explanation why, when you read the beginning, that she had magic as a kid, and she thought she had this thing, and then she lost it forever, and then suddenly we're reading about all of these different abuses that she is going through. I legitimately thought this was going to be one of those, well, not even one of those books. There's not a lot of books that do this. I thought this was going to be she had magic, and it's a tragedy because she just never gets it back, and she just grows up knowing that I have this and I can't reach it and I'm lost forever. And I don't know why my brain had decided that was going to be a thing, because it doesn't make sense literary-wise, and it doesn't really make sense in the story, and it would be weird for that to happen to a main character in the Western fiction world. And then we got to the point where she gets her magic back, and I was like, I wasn't even like excited for her. I was just kind of like, oh, well, that's not what I was expecting.
I mean,
I don't know why. I was thinking
if you want that mood, I have a series to recommend.
Oh boy. I don't really want that mood. It was just like my brain would just kind of decided that it was gonna be true, and I was like emotionally ready for that, and it didn't happen. And like, oh, okay, cool. I mean, this makes a lot more sense, but I don't know why I was ready for the other thing.
We've made difficult decisions.
And there are still more ahead of us.
2 people aren't enough to save the galaxy.
We need the toughest,
smartest,
deadliest allies.
We need you.
We need you to join us.
And listen to Reignite,
a certain point of view podcast about storytelling,
love,
and Mass Effect.
Join us every other Thursday as we fight for the fate of an entire galaxy.
You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts.
Or at certainpov.com/reignite.
We're counting on you.
We should go.
On to the wrap-up and ratings. For our gratuity rating, for the emotional connection.
You're gonna hate this.
Oh no.
You're gonna hate
Irrelevant?
it a lot.
Is it oh no. Oh, sorry, not. Wrong
Oh
category.
no, you're right.
What?
You're not gonna hate it yet. You're gonna hate it when we get to the next category.
I knew what you were
jumping
gonna say.
ahead to that. I think it's actually pretty. I think it's depicted. No, the trauma itself is moderate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we get to point of view, we'll get a little bit more of like the nuance I think you're implying.
Yeah, and when we get to care, and we get to why, you're gonna hate my opinions, and that's okay.
I agree about moderate for the gratuity rating. For neglect, this is my brain immediately wants to go to severe.
It is. It's severe.
Yeah.
You're also gonna hate my.
So I mean, what it is
not gonna like my decisions.
Is what actually gets shown in the book severe?
Yes.
Okay, I just mentally double checking.
Yeah. No, it absolutely is.
I mean, for Patricia, no question. Yes.
For Patricia,
I just wasn't as
it's
sure about
torture
Laurence.
porn.
Yeah, for Control, so that topic with Patricia, like absolutely that's torture porn. Okay, and then for neglect, for Laurence is severe. Okay. Then
and for our audience, I want to be clear that it's not torture porn because of exactly what is happening to her. We don't put out this rating very often, and so I just want to clarify that the description between the difference between severe and torture porn is partly the level of visceral description given, and also partly the weight given to the difference between how it's affecting the character versus what is happening and how what is happening is described. And I'm not going to go into details, but in this particular book, the scenes that are more that push this to our torture porn category are ones where if you were more predisposed to, or let's say if you'd had this happen to you, it's going to feel like the emphasis is on how detailed the problems happening are, not on taking care of the character. So that's why. Because I know some of you are going to pick this up and read it and go, what? It's incredibly visceral description wise. There's a lot of layers and a lot of implications. And it feels like the emphasis is on the perpetrators having fun, shall we say, and not on the person who is being harmed.
Yep. Because, like, a thing we don't often get to the opportunity to talk about, just because we don't have a lot of things that are in the torture porn category without... This is a weird space, so I want to just briefly say, like, you could have a trauma that is... If you just listed, like, the raw content warnings, it would be, like... It would feel like it's lower down on the severity, but how you show it makes all the difference, and that's what our podcast is for.
And we've had books that have literal physical torture scenes that have been only severe and not torture porn because of the way they're described. So this category is not about it being specifically torture. It's a little bit odder than that. And we actually, I don't know if we've said this on the podcast before, but we have tried to come up with a better term for this category that
because we
is
don't
a little
like
bit
the
more accurate.
Yeah, because we don't like the implication that this is any kind of sexual thing necessarily. So if anyone knows a better term for this, if anyone has
a better thing that we could call it, that'd be great. But like we haven't thought of one, and so if you get scenes or traumas that are described in a certain way or with a certain feel to them, they end up in this category.
Yep.
All right. Why this trauma?
Integral, interchangeable, or irrelevant. You're going to tell me you think the emotional connection is irrelevant.
Yes, I am. This is my opinion. I think that you could cut her from the story completely, and if that would just be a thing. Or, let's say, you can have Laurence have a girlfriend and never give her a name, and nothing happens. I do not think anything would matter. I do not think anything would change.
Because all of the point of her existing is so we understand why he would be torn when he has to carry out a very particular action, but that action is actually centered around Patricia and not around Serafina, and it's not even about her.
He could just be angsty in his room with no person to talk to about how it is or compare Patricia with, and nothing would have to change ever.
You're right. Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think you're wrong. I just hate that. Okay. All right. For the trauma for neglect and control, I'm lumping them together because I think they're both integral.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of this book.
Yeah. The interplay between these two things is the book.
And how they grow out of it and deal with it. Or don't grow out of it. Yeah. Like what they decide to do as they grow up and continue to be people but have this in their pasts. Yep, that is the point of the book in a lot of ways. There are other things you could call the point of the book, but not if you're listing main traumas.
Not if you're us.
Not if you're us. Okay. For trauma being treated with care, with the emotional connection.
Emotional connection, I'm actually going to argue that it was treated with care.
Yeah. Yep.
It was not treated. It was treated with so much care that it quit being an emotionally impactful thing. And I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm saying that there's it was almost treated with so much care that the trauma of our two main characters just overshadowed and pushed this other character out of relevance even a lot bit. hence the irrelevant tag. I will say this.
It feels like it was on purpose. Like, we
It
don't
does.
think the
It
author
feels very
tried
deliberate.
to do something else. We don't think the author tried to do something else and messed up.
No. This felt like that was the point of this character.
Yeah.
And it's so circular, too, because this is a character that's all about not being relevant and not being connected and people not getting it. And yeah, I will say this, though. I would read a whole book about this other character actually having a life and doing things. Mm-hmm. That would be cool. I would love that. They're a great character. It's just when it comes to trauma specifically, they were just kind of there, and then they were wrapped in a little cocoon and pushed off to the side. So, trauma-wise specifically.
Yep.
What do you think about our other two? We might butt heads on this. I'm unsure.
So I think that Patricia and Laurence's things were handled very differently, and part of that is because of the kind of trauma that it is. Like, a little bit is the kind, because like there's a thing that happens whenever the trauma is neglect, where, to me at least, it's hard for that to be in the middle zone on care. Like, neglect, I think, to me, at least, it feels like it's usually going to be treated with care or just no. Because if you have anything in the middle, like, it's really hard to pick out the nuance between did they have enough care on nobody doing anything for this person, or almost enough on nobody doing anything for this person. I do think that we had a lot of care. For one, like, there is a thing where it's heavily implied that as a result of the neglect, the character was probably tortured. Mm-hmm. We don't see that, and that's why I use words like probably, and it's implied because he went through something, and we as readers are spared exactly whatever that was. We know it was bad. So yeah, I think with neglect, this was treated with care.
Can we call it enough?
For the reader? We can call it enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I actually don't think it was straight out treated with care, but I also think that neglect is one of those traumas, and we've talked about this before. We've had this happen in several other episodes, where if you just treat neglect specifically with enough care,
they don't show anything.
Yeah, it's kind of a show or tell thing. Because if you just say, well, someone was neglected, it's like, okay, but in your book that doesn't mean anything unless you put it on the page, in a way. It's one of those weird ones where you can't just state that it happened.
You have to show someone failing to do a thing repeatedly.
Or even just once, but it still has to be there. And so it's really hard to, because if you just straight up treat neglect with care, it kind of vanishes. And so,
like, if we had picked torture as the trauma here, that would have just been care.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We don't see
absolutely.
it. Right. Like, if that's what we had done here, just for contrast, for understanding these ratings.
Yeah.
For control. This is, I feel like not enough.
I agree. Or, and the thing is, I don't think it's just no.
It's not no.
But this is one of those where if you don't even have to have experienced exactly what this character goes through in the book, but if you've experienced any kind of serious parental abuse in general,
and food-related trauma.
And
here's
that
where
could
I
make
would
you put this book down and just straight up walk away. It would be too much. And it wouldn't even take a lot.
And here's where I think we should put in, like, a minor caveat of, like, those are very strong things for both of us. And so we acknowledge it's possible we're a little bit more sensitive to these particular things, especially in combination.
But we did also label this category torture porn because of the descriptions.
I know. I'm just, with the caveat that if you read this and you're like, what were they talking about? I'm like, I'm so glad this doesn't hit you the way it hits us.
Yeah.
Like, I do feel like this is one of our biases where anytime there's like a thing with food, we're like, oh no, this is worse. And I don't think we're necessarily wrong.
No.
I think we might, it's possible that we're a little more quick to notice when something related to food or parental abuse is not enough care.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's
I don't think we're wrong.
Well, if you did, we would change it.
And hey, it is our podcast, so if at least we're wrong about this, we're going to be consistently biased in a way that you can predict and will still be useful to you when you're navigating the world of books. So,
yay! And
that's the point of consistently following specific reviewers. Yay. Anyway.
We've done a lot of, like, editorializing this episode, and I at least am fully cognizant of that, but I feel like this one, it makes sense here, so.
We're recording this, like, Christmas is next week.
Yeah.
We had a break over Thanksgiving. Hello, greetings
we had a
to
bunch
everyone
of things happen in between.
Greetings to everyone in 2021.
Yeah.
I just got a cat. Like, that's where we are in our personal timelines for whenever this comes out. Like,
yeah.
It's been a weird week. I'm so happy to be recording again. It was a gap for us. It wasn't a gap for you. We appreciate you, audience. All right. Point of view. Everything is either Patricia or Laurence. And that means that for emotional connection, we do not get that character's perspective. We just don't. Just at all. And then with neglect and control, we, in one of the most pivotal neglect scenes for Laurence, we have Patricia's perspective instead.
This is true.
So with that caveat, we usually have the perspective of the person being hurt, but occasionally we have, especially for aftermath, which I think also would count in the thing where Patricia is there for Laurence's very particular scene. I think it feels like it tended to be that we have the person for the trauma and then the other one of them for the aftermath. Not always, but like enough for that to feel a bit like a pattern. I like it because it means that you watch the other person processing like through someone else's eyes, and it I think it worked really well. I liked it. But yeah,
and it worked in a way where it didn't feel like we were just flipping back and forth between narratives. It felt very integrated and a big story that we just happened to have two perspectives on, which was kind of nice. We've read some books, not recently, but we've read some books on this podcast where that's not done that way. And it's not bad. It's just different. And so it was different to read where there was this really nice, like, well, they're both kind of observing similar things when they are in the same room. And we get to see that from both perspectives. So that was cool.
All right. Aspiring writer tip. Do you have one?
I guess if you have a character that you just really want to put in a book and they aren't really part of that story, but like you kind of just want them to exist, don't be afraid to give them a life. Like, I'm not kidding when I say this minor character, I would read a whole series about them. Like, I wish I had more of them in this world. And I realized that narratively, it felt very deliberate that they weren't. It felt like a point being made, but I really liked that character, and I would love to see her just dealing with, robots and humanity, and that's all those things I'm gonna say about her. Like, that would be cool.
Yeah, like, if even your minor characters imply an existence beyond the page, it really makes the world feel a lot bigger because it stops feeling like your major characters and secondary characters are like puppets following some timeline.
Yeah.
I mean, just even, I think one of the things that really helped with that here is that she just like told one of the main characters that like he was wrong. She's like, you're wrong, and bye.
And you're wrong, and I'm out. See ya.
And they need to deal with it. Yeah. So, having either heavily implied or outright stated that people don't agree with your main characters can do a lot to make a world feel less staid or homogenous.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to spend like a whole bunch of time like on why necessarily, just depending on the story. But making it implying more inner lives than you have time to show, implying them can do a lot.
I will say too, it was really kind of a little bit refreshing on that point to read a book where the main character was not the one calling out other people, instead they got called out.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my favorite books that we've even covered on the podcast have moments like that. But this was one where it wasn't set up as the main character is learning things the whole book. This was just they're existing and they have their life and they have their stuff, and then they get called out on the things that they're doing wrong, and it felt very real and solid. That was cool. All right. Oh boy. I like the rich lives of the forest. I don't think I can add any details to that. I just like that it exists as a place, and it's separate, and it's not part of humanity. I really enjoy it, and I really like how it's described, and I really like how it's set up, and I really like how it is just, it's there, and it's implied to be there forever, and it doesn't go away, and that was really cool. I would also love a book just about that. With no people in it. I would read that book too.
My favorite non-traumatic thing is Peregrine.
That's fair.
I just really, really like them. Mentioned them in the characters and then didn't mention them much at all on this topic, but like Peregrine is really cool, and I just really like what they do in the story and their role in it, and it just feels kind of fitting that yours was the forest and mine was Peregrine. If you've actually read the book, that's hilarious. Or you're rolling your eyes. It's one of those two. But yeah,
statistically
really
the
like
latter.
Them a lot. Probably. Anyway, think that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. This is one of those books where, like, this episode isn't going to come out until 2021. This was, like, the third or fourth book that we had on our list for, like, okay, we've got to talk about this. Oh, man,
yeah, way back in January 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We had this as a plan, and it took us, like, the whole year to get to it, which is fair, because now, to be fair, we planned most of our 2020 books in January, and this one just so happened to be later, but I'm glad we did actually get to it before the end of the year.
Recording wise, at least. Yeah. Because I read it, and I think this is the first one that I read that I had not read before we started the podcast.
Okay.
I read it, and I was like, we have to talk about this. The other one that I think is coming out before this, but we haven't recorded yet, I don't know. Beneath the Citadel by Destiny Saria is another one that's in that category where I read it and I was like, gotta talk about it. So you've either already enjoyed that episode or we'll get it later, depending on nebulous whatever time shenanigans. So thank you so much for joining us on the last thing we recorded. Well, our last full episode we're recording while it's 2020, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
So we will see you in a fortnight. All music used in this podcast was created by Nicole as HeartBeatArt Co. and is used with permission.
You can follow us on Twitter at Books That Burn, all one word.
You can email us with questions, comments, or book recommendations at booksthatburn@yahoo.com.
Support us on patreon.com/booksthatburn. All patrons get access to our upcoming book list and receive a one-time shout-out.
You can leave us an iTunes review. This helps people to find the show.
And find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.